Welcome back to the Science and Art of Open Water Swimming. My guest today is Jordina Quain, an endurance swimmer, sexologist, educator, researcher, and advocate whose work sits in the fascinating intersection of physical, mental, and sexual health. Earlier this year, Jordi completed her first solo port to pub crossing from Leighton Beach to Wudgemup, Rottnest Island, spending more than 9 hours in the water navigating her way across the channel. She's also an Ironman and an experienced endurance athlete. Alongside her own experiences, Jordi is undertaking a PhD exploring how exercise impacts women's sexuality and sense of self, examining topics such as identity, self-confidence, and relationship to body, self, and others. What's attracted me to Jordi's work is that she's asking questions that many have probably felt but rarely stop to examine. Why do endurance sports become such an important part of who we are? Why do people willingly spend hours swimming, running, and riding? What happens to our sense of self through years of training, challenge, injury, community, and achievement? In this conversation, we explore Jordi's own journey into open water swimming, her recent port to pub experience, what she's learning through her research, and why endurance sport and sexuality can have such a profound impact on the way we see ourselves and the world around us. Jordi, Kaya, and Wanju to the podcast.
Hi, Grant. Thank you so much for having me. I get to talk about my favourite topic with a captive audience. Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. So before we get into your research and your professional work, I'd really like you to start with your own story. How did you first find your way into open water swimming and endurance sport?
So, after listening to a few other episodes of yours, it seems like a lot of people started swimming really young and quite competitively, whereas I'm probably on the opposite end, where I was from a small country town where we played team sports, and that was our currency and language of a small country town. And I didn't come to individual sports until before COVID started getting into trail running, started triathlon during COVID. And after completing my Ironman, I didn't really want to be on a bike ever again, to be honest with you. So I really was excited to finally get to dedicate my time to my favorite part of triathlon, which was swimming. And after my Ironman, I had quite a traumatic health experience around a type of migraine called hemiplegic migraine, which comes from experiencing a lot of acute stress. And it meant that I couldn't walk and talk on occasion during episodes. And the only type of exercise I could do when I was battling these migraines was a little bit of a splash in the ocean. So I couldn't balance on a bike and I couldn't run without getting a migraine, but I could get in the ocean and have a little splash about. It was really my saving grace at the time. And I was swimming with a friend at Cottesloe, having my daily splash to get through the health stuff. And I looked over at Rottnest and I thought, that's going to be my comeback goal. I'm going to swim there. I don't know how long it's going to take me. I didn't know how bad the health stuff was at that time, but I thought that's going to be my goal. I'm going to get there, and that's what's going to get me through recovering from this health challenge. So yeah, I spent the last 2-3 years building up my capacity to swim long distances and was absolutely stoked to complete that goal as a duo last year and as a solo this year. And really was such a full circle moment to achieve that goal and feel healthy and capable and independent after battling such a health journey. And having previously been so healthy and capable, it felt like quite a reclaiming of my own body and capability, which, yeah, I'm just so grateful for.
So you obviously played team sports growing up. Did you see yourself as a sporty kid? And did you have much access to open water growing up?
I definitely saw myself as a sporty kid. I was kind of half artistic, so I did about 3 types of dance and musical theatre, and then played cricket and soccer, basketball, netball, all the kind of country sports. We lived by the ocean, so we're a very ocean-based family, mostly surfing, but not. I would say I didn't really know how to do freestyle until about 2021. I had to get some adult lessons on how to actually do it properly. So I always felt very comfortable in the ocean with the currents and with the waves and things from growing up surfing and as an ocean-based family, but certainly had no technique, no style. I think the concept of doing individual sports, and especially endurance sports, for long periods of time. It's a bit abstract in my family. There's no ball, there's no score, there's no team that you're doing it with. Why would you swim that long for that far? Was some of the questions from my family. So we were aware of the ocean, but didn't know about things like triathlon or long distance swimming, or swimming to cover a distance rather than to get out to the surf. So it's quite a different concept for me to start looking into that side of sport and activity.
So, what is it about swimming that you love about it so much?
For me, well, many reasons, but one of the reasons is no one can really contact you. I'm someone who gets quite overwhelmed with the endless amount of emails and notifications and the to-do lists, and having your head in the water with your own thoughts is something that I adore. It helps me think deeply and feel deeply. I think about people in my life. I think about if I'm living aligned to my values. I notice and appreciate the animals of the ocean. I notice and appreciate the weather. And it makes me feel really grounded in a world that's pretty busy and bonkers and stretching you for time. So between the nature and the rhythmic motion of your arms and the independence of moving your own body through water, not relying on anyone else or the mechanics of a bike, it's really empowering and grounding for me. So having my family away from where I live, whenever I jump in the water, I also feel like in the other part of Australia, my family's probably in the same ocean, doing a similar activity. So it just couldn't be more special for me.
Now, as you mentioned, you recently completed your first solo in the Ports Pub crossing this year. Can you tell us a bit about that journey?
Yeah, so as I said, it took a while to gain back my ability to swim at all, let alone to swim over to Rottnest. It was a really big goal. It was absolutely slow and steady. I joined a local swim squad, Brucey's swim squad with Tamara, and she had this unwavering faith in me that I think carried me through absolutely to the finish line and beyond. So training a lot there. I was training with Pod Squad at Cottesloe Beach, and what you would notice from these experiences is who I do things with is really important to me. So I could absolutely have trained by myself and followed a program and things like that, but I'm mostly motivated by the people around me, the energy that they give, the self belief they give. And I believe one of your last speakers on the podcast talked about the people around them having a belief in him to complete something. And when you have the self doubt or the, oh my goodness, the hubris of me to think I could possibly do this, you rely on those people around you to have that belief in you. And it really carries across to all facets of your life. So I was really honoured to ask my brother, who had said he would never, ever have a vessel cross over for the swim. He said he would never do that, couldn't think of anything more stressful. Managed to coax him into the role. So thanks, Roy. I got my dad on board to be the support on the boat, and he's a swimmer and always really encouraged me in sporting spaces my whole life. And then I have my best friend Blaze, who I think used her voice for the entirety of the 9-hour crossing to cheer on everyone else. So, everyone says all the time it's an independent sport, but you absolutely don't do it alone. And I think it couldn't be more true. So whether it was battling an injury that made me think I would never finish, talking to my old coach, Coach Deb, she said, Jordi, you can do this. Even if you had one arm, you will figure this out. You have grit and determination like no other. You'll be slow and steady, but there's no way you're not making it. So the belief from others really got me across there, and the cheering throughout. So with an injury and pain and just the challenge of the ocean and the currents, we got there and ticked that one off the list. So it was definitely a team effort.
So, you mentioned some challenges with injury and maybe actually swimming with one arm. Can you tell us about those challenges?
Yeah, sure. I mean, absolutely not a special experience. I've developed swimmer's shoulder, which I'm sure many people identify with the fact that it's really hard to say, yeah, I'm a swimmer. I always thought, no, I'm not a swimmer. I'm someone who swims, and I swim a lot and I love swimming, but I didn't feel like I'd ever earned the title of being a swimmer until I got swimmer's shoulder. And I thought I could no longer deny the fact that perhaps I'm a swimmer. So that was really tough because it was so painful to train, and it reduced my ability to train at all. Having a few weeks off and barely being able to complete 500 meters, you just think, well, I'm down and out here. So a lot of the mental game and the trying to keep on the rehab and having a really good physio and chiro. And yeah, it's tough when you already have that wavering belief in yourself, or you've had other health struggles or work struggles, relationship struggles that you're balancing to complete something, that when your body starts to crumble, you think, oh, that's it, I'm done. So it took a lot of patience and a lot of big cries and a lot of calling on those people who were in my corner to encourage me and support me. But got there in the end. It was pretty bloody painful. But yeah, mind over matter sometimes. And yeah, I was grateful for the medical support that I had and the access to medication and drugs that we have to suppress that pain, and getting cortisone injections that meant I got to the other side. So it's tough, but it was always going to be tough. It just was made a little bit tougher, but we got there.
So, in that 9-hour swim, what do you think the hardest moment was?
I think the hardest moment for me was waiting for the pain to kick in. I knew it would come, but I didn't know if it would be at 1 kilometer or 19 kilometers. So that anticipation of pain is something I think I would work on managing in the future. But to be honest with you, I just loved it. I just loved it because I felt so grateful to have had the opportunity to give it a crack. You know, it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of time. A lot of people gave up their time and their day to support me. And it's pretty hard not to just feel an abundance of love and support in those moments. So I did know that if I didn't complete it, that would actually be okay, as much as my brain would say I'd failed and no one would love me and how, what an embarrassment, don't bother going home. I did actually know that the people around me didn't care that I finished it or how fast I finished it. They cared that I tried and that I was taking a bet on myself, and that being ambitious is something that's quite inspiring whether you finish or not. So I didn't like, it was tough. They didn't like the waves at the end of the race. That was absolutely something that could have not occurred. But no, it wasn't as tough as I was expecting. But a lot of the mental prep, the support I had on the day, and being someone who has a lot of experience in endurance sport means that I wasn't so much afraid of the hard stuff. But that was only made easier with good support.
So, a lot of these reflections, it seems that it was less about the result itself, and there's all this connection and support. What do you think endurance sports gives people beyond fitness and performance?
Oh, so much. I think, like all things, it's a spectrum. You know, if you do it by yourself in quite an isolated case, you'll still get a lot out of having structure and building your own capability. Maybe you're seeing people admire your goals, in your work life or your family. But if you're doing it with people in a community where you're leaning on others and getting advice from others, not only do you get the structure and the routine, which can be really comforting for people in a busy world to kind of have some structure in their life, but that sense of belonging, which is something that cannot be underestimated, is feeling like people understand you, they care about you and your plight, they care about your goals and your health, and they believe in your vision. And it's really quite addictive having people believe in you, because your own view of yourself becomes broader. I often say, if I hadn't completed an Ironman, I never would have thought I could do a PhD. But doing endurance sport means that now I understand I can actually do anything. I've never been the smartest, I've never been the most talented, but I try to be kind and I work hard. And I know that over time, with structure and setting goals and asking for help and putting in time and effort, that I can achieve pretty much most of the things that I want to. So that is a very powerful gift that sport of all kinds gives, but particularly endurance sport. I think whenever you set a goal that's ambitious and scary and you start off thinking, my goodness, I could just never do that. When you finish it, you suddenly start to question all the other facets in your life where you may have limited yourself, where you've said, I can't do that. That's what other people do. That's crazy. You start to think, oh gosh, nothing's crazy and I can do anything, which does sound a bit cocky, I think, sometimes, but I mean it in a really humble way, in that it's also how you express capability to others. So my friends, my colleagues, my staff, my community, I share that with them. You're capable of more than you think. You've just got to set a goal, ask for help, work really hard, manage setbacks, and you can achieve those things too. So it's about absorbing that positivity, but also sharing it back to others, that I think is inherently powerful about endurance sport.
So you've progressed a bit of trail running, some shorter distance triathlon, half Ironman through to Rottnest swimming. So if you reflect on that, you've set bigger goals as you've progressed. Why do you think people willingly choose these challenges that most people consider uncomfortable, difficult, or even irrational?
Mm, such a great question. I mean, for every person, there'll be a different reason, right? But I think we can be looking for meaning in our life, or a sense of purpose, or a sense of control. So we might live in a world where we can't control, what's happening at work, or in our family, or if we're sick or ill, but we can control what we do in a day and where we put our energy and our efforts. So there's a lot of research and stories around, for example, people who've experienced trauma or grief or loss, or divorce or depression, seeking out particularly endurance sport to give them that structure, a long term goal. When you're depressed or when you're grieving, it's an emotional state that keeps you in the current, and it's very hard to project and picture a future where you're going to be okay, we could even be happy, or where you're feeling better. And having an endurance sport goal means that you're often planning a year and a half ahead. So it keeps you thinking future focused, even if in the present you're feeling really awful and you can't imagine getting up tomorrow and jumping in the pool. You're thinking a year ahead, which is for the most part a positive experience, sometimes daunting, but mostly really positive. So whether it's about connecting with other people who have similar values as well, I think is interesting. um, Around that kind of belonging is also a concept called mattering, which is one of the favorite things I've learned in my research. And mattering is feeling like if you don't show up, people will notice. If you show up with a bit of a different tone, or you're a bit quieter that day, people will notice and ask how you are. It's a concept that you feel like you matter in the world, and that people notice you, and that you're connected to others. And I see that a lot in sport, and I see that in endurance sport, even though it is seen as that independent achievement. You're in a world where other people are aligned with your goal, have the same values of maybe health, or striving, or doing hard things. And so we don't always have people with those same values in our work or our family. I think when I was training for my Ironman, it was my main thing going on in my life, right? Training twice a day and going to work meant that I was quite detached from my family and quite detached from my long term friendships. And I was spending most of my time with people who may be referred to as acquaintances, who became friends. And we didn't have anything in common, really. People doing different jobs and different ages and stages and races and religions and things. But we had this kind of common goal that connected you. And it was really nice to have other people not just think that training for an Ironman was crazy. You're with people who think, no, that's amazing, good on you. Tell me about it. How many kilometers have you done? How's your body feeling? And that was really important to me, because I didn't necessarily have friends or family who thought of sport and endurance activities in a way that made them excited. They kind of just thought they were a bit bonkers, I think. So it's very powerful to feel connected and like I mattered in those spaces. And yeah, really just something I'm so grateful to have found in my life.
Now, you've started to mention the interest in research. So you're not just living these experiences, you've chosen to study them as well. So, can you tell us a little bit about how you came to studying in this area in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. So being a sexologist means that wherever I am, I believe I'm seen as quite a safe space for people. So when you're trained in sexology, you have to participate in quite intense forms of training that relate to how you judge others, how you perceive behaviors. You're trying to strip away any kind of preconceived notion or judgment or shame that you may be perpetuating on others or yourself. So it's quite a rigorous process. A postgraduate degree at university. And when you've gone through a course like that and you've worked in my field, people know they can say things to you that they can't typically say. It's always like confession. I was raised Catholic, feels like confession. I've heard a lot of stories from a lot of people in a lot of different places. And what that meant when I was training for my Ironman was that, men in my club were talking to me about how the pressures of training for the Ironman limited the time they had with their partner and with their family, and how that was causing issues in their relationships. And they weren't quite sure how to get their partner on board with their vision, because they did recognize it was taking a toll on their family. And I had women talking to me about how they felt really disconnected from their body, or feeling like a sexual person. So they were trying to date and trying to kind of build a life with people through dating or their relationships, but finding that they really couldn't connect to their own desire or attraction, and they just felt like a machine, really. And I had that experience myself, certainly. So I heard a lot of these stories where people both had really positive outcomes from sport, so feeling confident, capable, like they have goals and something to achieve towards, connecting with people, they're in nature, really positive things. But then I think I was in quite a privileged position to also hear some of the tricky, heavy hearted aspects of people's lives while they were training. So it was something where I liked that I was able to give people comfort and normalize that these things are stressful and tricky, and normal, I suppose. But when I looked to the research, which I always do, I couldn't find much information around research in the space of endurance sport and our relation to our body. So my PhD started as looking at how endurance sport affects our sexuality. And there was such little research there that I've opened it up to being broader around all forms of exercise and how it impacts our sexuality. So it was really interesting. I found one study that I love, I have to send it to you, that looked at how endurance sport affects existing relationships. And I interviewed both the athlete and the partner of the athlete around what effect endurance sport had on their relationship and their family. So most partners said it's really great for our children to have a positive role model who cares about their health and has a goal and is striving. But I've got a lot more childcare to do on my own because my partner spends most of the weekend out on a bike. But they showed that there was these points throughout the training period where they were incredibly disconnected and struggling, but closer to a race and on race day, they came really close together in terms of feeling connected and empowered and close. And then after race day, they were even closer. So it kind of showed this really interesting curve around the challenges that endurance sport places on relationships, but the opportunities that it also places in terms of people having their own life and goals, and bringing that energy home to their partner is something that we know from many years of research in relationships, that if you have a life and if you have a passion and a community and connectedness, and you bring that sense of self and that energy to your relationship, it's really positive and powerful for either finding a partner or for maintaining a relationship. Anyway, I found that really interesting in a world where there's not much research on endurance sport and relationships. So, yeah, seeing this gap and wanting to get some answers for mostly the women in my life who were the people telling me about the impacts to their body and sense of self, I thought that why not? I will do some research into this space because I couldn't get the topic out of my mind. And I had a colleague in the academic space. So I've worked at a university, but not kind of identify as an academic, I suppose. She just heard me talking about it so much that she said, Jordi, you have to do a PhD in this. And I know you don't think you're an academic, but academia needs more people that don't think they're academics. We need to broaden our scope of what this means, and we need people that are good at knowledge translation and education and connection. Not that those things can't all exist, but I was seeing myself as not capable of fitting in a PhD box, but having a leader and a mentor, I suppose, see me as making a new box maybe was really positive. So she'd sent through a quote that said, when multi-passionate people become multidisciplinary, they create new fields. And I loved that because while there isn't much research happening in the space of sexuality and exercise, it gives me quite the opportunity to try to create a bit of a new field and merge those worlds together, because there's certainly a lot of evidence to indicate that they should be more connected than they currently are. That was a very long, rambly story about how I've gotten into my research and what I'm really passionate about.
It's interesting when you look at it from your lens. If I look at it from a coaching lens, then I would see a lot of similarities. The challenges of working with someone who is going to do an endurance based sport and the time they spend away from their partner. For me as a coach, that initial interview with that athlete is with their partner. So there's a complete understanding of
Mm.
what the requirements are to try to offset some of those times where you're away for the whole weekend doing that exercise. Obviously, you've had your mentor sort of said it's time to do some research here. But when did you realise there was a genuine gap in what we understood about exercise and people's lived experiences?
I suppose when I had quite a lot of questions coming to me either at the coffee shop or into my DMs after long rides and things, I am someone who loves looking at the research to be able to provide factual information to people. So I like to normalize things and help them feel connected and not perpetuate shame. So I wouldn't be shutting down their questions or saying that's inappropriate or that's gross or whatever. I'd just be saying, thanks so much for telling me. That sounds really tough. I can see how that's affecting you. Let me see what I can find out about that and let you know. And it got quite disappointing to keep going back to people around topics like body image, I would say. So that disconnectedness around desire and feeling like a sexual being, around sex drive. So people feeling like it's so strange. I have so much energy and investment in my physical training, but after I've been training all day and I've gone to work, I have no energy to give back to my partner, certainly no energy to put into our sex life, and people seeing a real dip in their sexual desire and wondering if that's normal. I couldn't really find much on that specific to endurance sport. In terms of people with body image, so a lot of people think when you start an endurance sport, you're going to get really skinny. Yeah, so there's this expectation that I'll be really tiny by the time I get to my Ironman finish line or my swim finish line. I'll be in this tiny lycra and I'll look amazing. But in the meantime, you have to wear lycra and bathers every day. And for a lot of women, that's their worst nightmare, which is devastating on a multitude of reasons. But it's tough to have to wear lycra where you feel like all the things you've tried to hide are suddenly exposed. I know for me before triathlon, I was always wearing a muumuu, like a baggy dress. I never wanted anyone to know what body shape I had going on underneath it. And then through training for the Ironman and having to wear lycra and bathers, I became someone who wore tight jeans and tight tops. And, I didn't really care so much about my body shape because I was so proud of what my body could do. And I do see online a lot of the rhetoric being that you'll be really tiny if you're an endurance athlete. And in a world where women are told that being tiny is succeeding or is a reflection of their value, it's pretty tough for people to put a lot of time and effort into their exercise to see that their body doesn't change. And in terms of things like pleasure, being sitting on a bike for 8-9 hours, people were getting things like saddle sores or the pressure that being on the bike causes on your pelvic floor means that a lot of people who are endurance athletes have particularly tight pelvic floors, so they might struggle to maintain holding their urine. So people experiencing some symptoms that people may relate to things like pregnancy, where you kind of suddenly need to go to the bathroom and you're busting, are things that these elite athletes who are so healthy in so many facets of their life, yet struggling with basic physiological functions within their body. We know a lot of women can lose their period as well, quote unquote lose, which is typically a sign that they're not eating enough food or enough of the right foods to fuel their output and potentially not resting enough. So really trying to move the world of sport away from thinking that losing your period is a positive thing and towards a world where people are being well fueled and able to maintain their menstrual cycle. So yeah, just so many topics, and there wasn't really many answers. There was answers mostly in relation to performance, how to harness your menstrual cycle to perform the best, how to manage your training load aligned to your menstrual cycle, things like that. A lot around body composition and muscle and eating disorders affecting performance. So definitely that elite focus. So Me being absolutely not an elite athlete, I identify as a try hard in all the positive senses. I wanted to know how these things affected the average woman or the average exerciser. What makes someone want to try a new weights class when they don't know anyone there? What makes them feel comfortable or not comfortable to put on their activewear and try to go for a run? There's a lot of things and layers around privilege related to exercise that we don't always realize. So I'm really interested in the barriers and enablers that exist for the quote unquote average woman. How can we get more women to feel like they do belong in sporting spaces, that they can exercise safely, that it makes them feel really good about themselves? And how can we give some caveats around things to look out for around your sexual health or your sexuality or fitting in, so that people know how to be safe in the physical sense in their sporting spaces, but also in their health sense of being within their own body. So it's certainly a lot to tackle. I have an ambitious goal, but I love an ambitious goal. So I'm just at the beginning, and hoping to communicate some of our findings and learnings along the way.
As you say, when we think about exercise, most people, generally talk about focus on fitness or performance or physical health, and quite often it's these other aspects that aren't discussed, and it could be because of lack of knowledge or not being comfortable to be able to speak about these topics. So your work is placing sexuality alongside physical and mental health. What do you wish the sport and health world understood better about sexuality and sexual well-being?
I think for me, there's a lot of things that I wish the sporting world knew around sexuality. I think it's still traditionally quite a rigid format, is what we're seeing. So you think of things like the Olympics or the World Cup or things like that, there's still a lot of barriers around what bodies get to be included, how much money and time are required to be included, and really seeing that these sporting spaces are then not adjacent to the complexity and the politics that we have in other parts of our world. There's just as much complexity and politics in sport and endurance sport as there is in other aspects of the world. So that being said, I'd love the sporting world to know that our relationships with ourselves, our partners, our friends, our community can be a massive enabler to engaging in healthy behaviors and physical activity. So feeling like there's other bodies that look like you, feeling like you're not going to get fat shamed when you go to the gym, feeling like that at your local sports store there's activewear that's in your size, and feeling like no one's going to say you can't go into that class because you're over the age of 60. It's like this sense of trying to encourage people's connection with their body and create spaces in sport that encourage people of all shapes, sizes, ages, stages to participate. So when we see relationship with body as not relevant, it's often an acknowledgement that the people who've designed that world have bodies that fit into it. So the body size and experience is always relevant in sport, and it can stop people getting on a bike or showing up at their local club for fear of being excluded. I love that you said that when you start your training around endurance sport, you get people's partners in, because we know if you're having a breakup or you're having marital stress, or you're trying to go on dates but people are making you feel shit about yourself. If you have these challenging experiences in your personal life that comes through to your training, people might overtrain because they're trying to avoid the tricky situations they have at home, and then they're more likely to experience injury, which is often not a link people make. Or if they feel like they have no control in their work life or with their colleagues, or they're being bullied at work or whatever, they may come to sporting spaces and bully other people because it's a space where they get to have power and they get to place their frustrations of their world onto other people. So it's just an acknowledgement that what happens outside our sporting worlds affects what happens inside. And I know for women, especially with things around women's health and sexual health, things like menopause and menstruation do affect your mental state and your physical output. And even things I noticed that aren't being talked about in sport are things like PMDD, which stands for premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is a very common experience, particularly for neurodiverse women, where before their period, so people might call it their PMS stage, the 2 weeks before their period, they can experience intense emotions around depression and suicidal ideation. And, as I've said, when you're feeling depressed or incapable or like you don't matter, no one cares about you, they're not behaviors that make you want to exercise, that make you want to show up at training, that make you want to show up at your local club, but they're not often linked in sport spaces. Is that awareness of menstruation for performance? Yes, that's now slightly being acknowledged, but the actual other stages of the menstrual cycle are not being acknowledged, how they impact mental health or how they impact our engagement with physical activity. So there's some of the things that I wish they knew. Another bit of research that I have loved finding, and I feel like I've sung from the top of every hill, is that the more joy we experience in exercise, the better it is for our health physiologically and for our mental health and well-being. So I speak to a lot of women about how they feel guilty for having a gym membership and never going, right? Kind of, not only is it not helping their physical health because they're not going, but they're adding layers of guilt and shame on themselves for paying for something and not going. And ultimately, it's typically because they don't enjoy it. So we're trying to encourage all people to find a form of exercise that they enjoy. And the research shows that it actually has better physiological impacts if you enjoy your exercise while you're doing it. So things like those random trampoline classes you see, or jumping in the ocean for 500 meters, is just wonderful. I think we can feel like goals these days have to be massive, or everyone's running a 10K, everyone's doing a marathon. Why would I run around the block? It all matters. And I had a coach say that it goes in the training bank. Like, instead of doing a 10K run, even if you do a 1K walk, it all goes in the training bank. And I love that mentality of something's better than nothing. So trying to encourage people to find joy, whether it's playing a playlist while you're at the pool, or getting a pair of bathers that makes you just feel really happy because they're bright pink and they're silly, or whatever it might be. Getting those, I don't know if you've seen those goggles that have eyelashes on them, or the swimming caps that are like have shark fins, like just silly things. Like, the more you can inject joy and pleasure and positivity into your physical health and physical health spaces, the more people feel like they can engage with them, they're wanting to engage with them, stay engaged with them, and encourage other people in their community to engage with them as well. So there's some things that I wish kind of came through in the sexuality space, I suppose, as well as the acknowledgement of varied gender identities and sexual orientations. So we can think that in sport, it doesn't matter what your sexuality is. And in many spaces, that is the case, and that can be really positive. But as I said, people who think sexuality and gender don't matter in sporting spaces are typically cis heterosexual people who haven't had to have their sexuality or gender matter because they've always been catered for. So it's not about trans and gender diverse and sexuality diverse people wanting every space to be about them and be catered to them, but it's just about trying to make it a bit more neutral and a bit more inclusive. And the same goes for varied religions and cultures as well. So, yeah, no, sorry, I've just gone absolute rant. I just think there's so many ways. I think there's so many ways we can work together to be more inclusive and encouraging of people's physical health and sexuality.
So, one thing I've noticed through your research communication is the care you do actually take with language. Why is framing and wording so important when you're talking about people's experiences?
Mm. It's important because simply with our language, we can make people feel more or less included. And trying to encourage people to be active or to be engaged in their community is something that really matters to me. And if I talk about sport as being for active people or sporty people, there's a lot of people who have grown up not seeing themselves as sporty people, and they're not going to feel reflected or included. And even the term sport, I found, has been really interesting. A lot of people, when they think of sport, they think of team sport, and therefore they think they're not a sporty person because all they do is one of my friends goes to the gym and goes to dance classes. And when she's seen some of my content, she's gone, "Oh, I actually didn't even realize I was a sporty person because I thought it meant, kicking a ball around or being on a team." And exercise is one of those interesting things where we're all meant to do it. It's good for everyone's health and well-being, but there's still what they might call little t trauma related to exercise. So certainly, if you've gone to school in Australia, you've had to play sport. You might have been picked last every time you were joining a team. You might have been punished to run laps. You may have been teased for not being very sporty or capable. So a lot of people, even though they're adults, can still have quite a sensitivity when it comes to exercise and self belief. So it is tough. I try to use language that is encouraging around, all bodies, all people, all cultures, all faiths, talking about exercise as movement or intentional movement for improving well-being, just trying to steer away from anything that relates to elite performance or might exclude the average person who enjoys going for a walk. Like, that's still exercise, and that's still just as wonderful and relevant as someone who runs a marathon every second day. Yeah.
So I just want to bring it back to a bit more into swimming. And I noticed before you port to pub crossing, you wrote a Mary Oliver quote on your arm. What is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Why was it that was the quote you chose to carry with you on the day?
Oh, I love that you've quoted that back to me. I love Mary Oliver. I really appreciated that quote because it reflected the respect and appreciation I have for people's ambition. So it's often not the outcome. The people who win the races, the people who represent the country the best at their sport or at whatever they endeavour, they're often not the people that not the only people I admire. I really love people who have a crack, give something a go, laugh along the way, the people that feel comfortable being the worst player on the team, because someone has to be the worst player on the team. Everyone has to try something new and be bad at it. And I do think that whether it's sport or any endeavor in life, really, as we grow up, we can feel less capable of trying something new because we don't want to look like idiots. We don't want people to talk about us. We don't want that shame, really, that shame that comes on that says, "You're a fool. Why did you ever think you could do this?" And I love the quote, "What do you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" Because for me, it gives that perspective of, "Oh, yeah, it is my life. And I get to decide what I do in it." And I think having a go at things and having ambitious goals is what I want to do in my one wild and precious life. And it's not because I'm the best or the fastest, it's just because I enjoy them and I think they make me a more grounded, grateful person. And I hope that me being, the have a go larrikin that I am encourages other people to be a bit of a have a go larrikin, because the more we gatekeep exercise or big goals or whatever it might be, you know, the more exclusive we're being. And I want to be someone that is encouraging other people to go for whatever their wild and precious life entails for them. So I really love the beauty of the art and science that you've got in the title of this podcast. And, my first degree was in theatre arts, and I certainly see such a correlation between art and science. And it's beautiful that you bring those together in your career and your podcast. So thank you.
Thanks. Just a couple of quick ones to finish off. What is your favourite swim set and why?
My favorite swim set is always anything in the ocean. I love just slow, long sets. So the the pull sets have just never been my favorite. It's just going for 4K swim in the ocean with nothing but your thoughts and knowing that you have coffee plans after with your mates. That's my favorite set.
Well, so my next one was around what goes through your mind while you're swimming, and you've mentioned a couple of times you're a bit of a thinker rather than a singer or a counter. If you're not thinking, if you're not planning, what else goes through your head?
Oh, I have my favorite thing I like to tell people if they have long distance events. My favorite thing to do on long swims is to go through. It could be a longer task for you, Grant. Go through and try to name every muscle and bone in my body that's working to make me swim. So I go right from my toes up to the top of my head and I say thank you to this certain bone or this certain muscle that's helping me do the activity. So it takes a while because the more physiology you know, the longer it takes, but it gives me this broader perspective that so much is happening in my body now for me to even be capable of swimming, that the time or the speed becomes quite irrelevant. And as someone who's had health challenges, often it's not until you have your capability stripped away that you become grateful for your ability to balance or your ability to have your brain say, have your elbow high and move it forward and into the water with a flat hand. If your brain can't control that, it's pretty tough. So when you get that ability, you think, how cool is it that my brain can tell my arm to do that? So my sense of gratitude of thinking of every part of my body from the bottom to the top is something I like to think about.
Now, from this conversation today, if people are interested in your work, where can they find you?
So you can find me on mostly Instagram as the sporty sexologist, or if you're a LinkedIn person, I'm on LinkedIn. Yeah, that's where I share about my research and about my own exercise training as well. I'm hoping to do some community-based presentations and training that people can sign up for just to learn a bit more about it. So they'll all be free where people can ask questions and learn about those topics. So they'll all be promoted on my Instagram and my LinkedIn.
Well, I'll make sure we include those links in the show notes. And finally, what keeps drawing you back to the ocean?
What draws me back to the ocean is probably something that a lot of other ocean swimmers have, is that perspective and that really healthy sense of I'm so small in the world and nothing matters. And I think that's a really healthy way to live because you feel like everything's going to be okay. And things can be quite overwhelming in a busy modern life, but getting back to basics of being near nature, being near blue spaces, saying good day to someone at the coffee shop, and just starting your day feeling a little bit more grounded. It's that ripple on effect that hopefully creates some positive moments for other people. So that's the feeling I just adore about ocean swimming.
Well, Jordina, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me today, to share your experiences and your passion for the work that you're doing.
Thank you for being forward thinking enough to see the connection along with me and for inviting me. I really appreciate it immensely. Thank you.
You're welcome. If you enjoyed this conversation with Jordina, please consider sharing it with a friend, training partner, or swim squad mate. Word of mouth is still the best way to help the podcast reach more people. You'll find the links to Jordina's work and social media in the show notes. If you'd like to support the podcast, please subscribe wherever you listen and leave a rating or review. It really does help others discover the show. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the water.